Hello and welcome everyone to this new video about generative AI. In this video, I will go quickly through the code of our Starlight Llama VS Code extension. In the previous video, we've seen how we can use this extension. Going through the code is only important if you really want to see how I created this extension. So I will not go in details because there are too many details, and also it's recommended that you will know a little bit about developing extensions for VS Code, and for that I have a link for you. So that's the official tutorial from Microsoft. As you can see, code.visualstudio.com, and then your first extension. In this tutorial here, you have all the information that you need to create an extension. So first you need to install the extension generator as shown in this command here, and here it's showing you how you can install it globally, and then you can just run the code generator. There are some values which you need to provide, such as name of extension, which language you want to use, is it a TypeScript or JavaScript, and so on. When you are done, you get a basic boilerplate, so you get an extension which I think has an hello world command or something similar, yeah. And of course, then if you want to know more, I think here at the bottom there are various links which you can go to and use. And most important is this samples from Microsoft. So if you click on that, it takes you to the GitHub repository, and you can see you have like a lot of examples, so you don't need to start from scratch. So you can copy. First you need to see what you want to do, and then you look at the closest example and you copy from that. And that's actually how I developed my extension. So there are like some parts which I did not even write myself, so just copy paste it from this repository. These parts I will not even go through them, yeah. But let me now go quickly through the folder structure here. So you can see first we have this .vs code. Here we have the settings for our project. There are like three JSON file here. One of them is the workspace. This is like just simply saying that our workspace is the parent folder of this folder. And then we have the launch.json, and here we have our launch configuration. So basically when we go here to debug and run, this is what we see here. So we have this run extension Starlight Llama. That's because here we have this run section, yeah. And in this run extension, it says that the type of our run configuration, and here they are extension host, so that VS Code knows that it should run a VS Code instance, and it should also look at our workspace folder to load the extension which we are developing. And finally, here in the extension, there are some other settings which, as you can see here, it has to do with the ESLint and the test. And then we have the media folder. So I added this folder and I put inside it all the files and resources which I want to allow at the client side. The VS Code extension consists of two parts. One part which runs on the server side, so using Node.js, and one part which is a client part which will run on the web browser. So here we have a web browser, as you know, running, and the whole VS Code here which you see is rendered in HTML basically. So what you see, what's rendered, and what you click on here, these are the client-side code. Mostly the clicks and keyboard event will be implemented as commands. These commands will be sent to the server side, and in the server side we can run code which usually does not run in the browser. For example, if we want to open files from our operating system, so this is something that's not allowed to be done from the browser. Also, if we want to write over these files and so on. So these things should be done on the server side. So you need to remember that these are the things which will run on the client side, and this source here is the code which will run on the server side. And of course, here in the middle, we have the node models. So if you are familiar with node development here, whenever you install a new model using npm, for example, it will land in this folder here. So this folder I usually do not touch. If you are not familiar with node development, I would recommend to see some videos about that. I have some videos about it also in my series about front-end development, so you can also look at those. The source, as I said, here contains the server-side code. When I started this project, I chose to use JavaScript for the server side. You can also use TypeScript for this. So if you prefer having the type of every variable, you can do that. Actually, I have to admit that could make the programming a lot easier, but I did not choose that since as I said, I have a series about JavaScript, but I did not have any series about TypeScript. So then there are the tests. So if we need to test something in this extension, I actually did not touch this file here. So let me close it. I will not go through it also. And then we have the git ignore. So this is for git. And again, some other files for the test, another git ignore, and then a markdown file, so I will not go through that. The most important markdown file, we will look at maybe the README file here. Yeah, then we have like some configuration, and the main file for the extension is this extension.js. This is an important file. This is the entry point of our extension, so the extension get activated from here. And as you can see, the first thing I do on activation, I read the settings. So if you remember from the previous video, those are, for example, the Ollama URL, is auto completion activated or not, and the name of the model which we'll be using for our extension. And then I'm creating a status bar item. Yeah, I did not go through this in the previous video because this actually now does nothing. I was like testing that, and maybe in the future I will be using it. And then as you can see here, I'm creating a completion provider and registering this. So those are really stuff which I copy pasted from the repository of Microsoft, and then registering some commands. So the main command here is the search command, and then the generate command. So the search, this will open the window which we've seen in the previous video where we can search for the Ollama models and pull them. And then the generate, this will generate a function for us based on the text in the current selected line in the editor. Yeah. So and that's it for this file. For the extension, you can see here there are also the configurations, also the node configuration, and then the markdown file. This is the file which you will see when you search for the extension here in the extension part. So now search for Starlight Llama and click on it. So what you see here is actually coming from this readme.md. So as you can see now, the main two folders in this project are the media folder and the source folder. Let me go quickly through them. So the media, as you can see, it has a JavaScript file for the sidebar. So let me first run the project to show you what this is. So if you run the project, you can see here Starlight Llama. So this is the sidebar. So basically this file here, Ollama sidebar, is the code behind this part here. Let me put those side by side. So there are some style sheets. So we have two style sheets, the reset.css and the vscode.css. Those also styles which I copied from the Microsoft repositories. I will not go through them, so I really did not change anything there. Then you can also see here that we have another JavaScript file. So this is the JavaScript file behind the search panel. So when you click here on search, you get this search panel. It's a kind of editor, and this GS code is used in this search panel. And of course, there are some icons like PNG and then SVG file here, and another two HTML files. So one of them is the HTML file for the sidebar, as you can see. So this sidebar here, and one for the search panel. So that's it about this media file. So remember, this is the code which will actually render the page. And then here, in the server side code, there's also two JavaScript files. So one for the search panel, one is the sidebar provider. And there's also some utility files, as you can see here. So basically editor utilities, get nonce, and this is like just a simple function. Then the general utilities and Ollama utilities and prompt utilities. So this is really utility files. And of course, there's the completion provider. Let's go first to the utilities. So in the editor utility, I have like function which helps me to know, for example, the current language. Those are functions actually which use the VS Code package, as you can see here. And then there are also functions to get the current line, selected text, and so on. So those are really like helpful functions to get the current context of the VS Code and so on. Yeah. So the get nonce is only just to create a random string. This is used for security reasons in GS. Then I have here the general utilities. In these utilities, as you can see here, I have a circular buffer, so I will not go in details. I think all of you knows the circular buffer. So basically I have a buffer of a certain size and I save data into it, and whenever the buffer is full, it will override the oldest item and so on. Yeah. And here inside this utils, I have static functions. So one of them to create this circular buffer, one to trim a string, and one to read an HTML file, because that's how I will render my pages. For example, when I will render the search panel, I need to read this file, and inside this file there are some variables which I need to replace. You will see that when we go to the search panel, for example. Yeah. And there's now the Ollama utilities. So these are the utilities to communicate with the Ollama. So as you can see here, first we need the settings, because in the settings we have the model and the URL, and if we are using autocomplete or not. So I think the cache size, I haven't exposed it to the user, so you cannot control it. So the cache will be used to save the results of the auto-completion. So I will be like saving the most recent 100 requests, and then when you are writing the auto-completion, if the request is already cached, I will not send a request to Ollama I would rather use the cached result. So as you can see here, then there are these two parts. So one for the cache, one for getting the settings, and then also here one for loading the settings. And here I have like a helper function just to track promises. Then we have the set model. So this is basically when you click in the search page here, that will be called to change the current used model and to pull the Ollama model, as you can see here. So we are sending an Ollama pull model, and then you have this progress bar which show you that you are downloading something. Till the download is done, it will report that for you also. And then also setting the URL, toggling the auto completion. So that will be called, for example, when you click here on start and stop. And this function is actually maybe this weirdest function here, which I have called list Ollama. So this function is used to list those models here. And for doing that, I first searched for an API from Ollama. I was not able to find an API from Ollama to list the models or search them. So what I did is, as you can see here, so I'm fetching the search page from Ollama. Then I'm using Cherio. So this is a package which I installed using npm. Using this Cherio, you can load the HTML file. So after we get the text, we load it to Cherio, and then we can parse it. So as you can see here, I'm getting all the links, and then I'm looking for the hash references. And so I went through the source of this page, of the search page, and looked basically how can I get this text here, and how can I get these models, and the title, and so on. And this code here is doing that actually. Yeah? So it's just like looking really through the HTML elements of the Ollama search page and extracting all the available models there. And then as you can see here is returning a list which contains the name of the model, a link for that, and description, and all different parameters. This I will use to render these buttons here, for example, the parameters. Yeah. And unfortunately, sometimes you get something like in these parameters like tools here, which maybe does not make that much sense. Yeah. And then there is this auto completion with Ollama. So basically, this is used when the auto completion is active. So the auto completion is based on splitting the current file, which we want to complete, into two parts. So based on where's the cursor, for example, here now in this file, the cursor is here. So this would be the text before the cursor. So the cursor in this location, and then everything below here till the end will be the text after the cursor. So that's the before text and after text, which you see here. And then based on the before text, we try to predict what's the next line of code should be. So then the before text is used to cache the request. So first we look in the cache. Okay, have we used this earlier? If yes, then we will return the results from the cache. If not, then we need to request the completion from Ollama. Then there's also, as you can see here, some helper function to remove some parts from the beginning of the text. Then this function here, Ollama complete, using chat API. So this function, as the name says, yeah, so it would prepare the prompt, and then it will call the Ollama chat using this prompt, and then return the results. There's also another function here which will use the Ollama generate API. So instead of calling ollama.chat as here, we will call ollama.generate as shown here. Yeah? And then we have the function generate function with Ollama. So this will be called when you press the Alt G to create a function based on the current text. So as you can see here, text and input the text, and then it will call the Ollama to create the function. So again, this is here based on the chat API. So this function is implemented here, as you can see, and it's called the chat API. Yeah, and then we have the test Ollama. So this function is called when you click this button here to test if Ollama is running or not. And so I can see it's fetching the URL which is saved at the settings. So it was for us, for example, localhost in the port of the Ollama. And then if the response was not okay, then it will show that yeah, and no response from Ollama. And if we got a response, then that will also be shown that Ollama is running. Yeah. Then we have a function here to download the Ollama. So this function will be called when you click this button here, download Ollama. And as you can see, we have a hard-coded URL here, which is referring to the EXEs. That's why this function will not work for other operating systems. So it will work only for Windows. And then this function will show the progress bar. And when the download is finished, as you can see here, it will execute the downloaded file. So that's it for this Ollama util. Then we have the prompt utils. So this prompt util contain two classes. The first one is the cache, and the cache, as you can see, it's simply a wrapper around this circular buffer, and it has a utility class which will have some like small string helper functions like finding the last line in a text or checking if the result has something similar to the current text. So this is used in the generate function because I noticed that some models, when we request completion from Ollama, so some models are returning at the beginning the same text which are similar to the text before. So basically the text which I'm using in the prompt to do the generation, and that's actually really bad. And this function is trying to detect that. So if the response we got from Ollama is repeating something from our prompt, so I want to remove it. Unfortunately, it did not work well. I need to maybe refine this function. Yeah, I need to find a better way to do it. Now what's left is these three main files. So the completion provider, the search panel, and the sidebar provider. And let's go to the sidebar provider. So this would be this bar here. And then it has two buttons, some text, two other buttons, and so on. So you can see here the code of this sidebar provider. The main bar provider is the panel. So I'll show the content of this panel and how it's created. So this would be the main part here. When we create this panel, so we have some options. Basically, it's showing what we want to load in the client side. So here I'm saying that everything in the media can be used in the client side and also from out compiled. Yeah, I don't think that I have in this extension anything the out compiled, but for example, if you are using TypeScript also to write the client side, then your code need to be compiled first to a JavaScript, then sent to the client. And when it's compiled, it will be put inside this folder out compiled. Then here we are getting the HTML for this sidebar using this function here, get HTML. I'll go through it later, but for now, let's go to the most important part here, which is the on did received messages. So this here, as you can see, we are adding a callback. This callback will be called whenever we get a message from the client side. Basically, when you click a button here, there is a message which will be sent to the sidebar and later similarly also to the panel, as I will also show. And this message will contain some parameters. For example, will contain this data here, and this data contains some fields. I will show you how we define those fields. For example, the field type, it will, in our case here, will contain on info, on error. So basically just to show some infos, as you can see here. So I'm using the VS Code window function to show some information, or on error. Then I also use the window to show some error messages. Then we have, for example, on download, and this message will be sent when you click download Ollama. And as we've seen before, so we'll be using Ollama utilities download and run function. And then there is also this on test. So when we click this button here on test, and again, we are directly calling the corresponding function from Ollama utilities. In the on search, what we are doing here is actually we are creating this window and showing it. That's what you see here. So from the search panel, we are calling create or show to show this Ollama search editor. Finally, we have this on autocomplete message, which we will get when we click this activating or toggling this autocomplete button. And again, this will call the corresponding function from Ollama utilities, which we have already seen. Yeah? Let me go now quickly to the get HTML for the web view. This is the function which will render these buttons here and the whole sidebar. As you can see, it first get the styles. So basically we have this reset.css, which is in the media folder, and also the VS Code.css from the media folder, and the JavaScript for the sidebar, which we called it Ollama sidebar, and also in the media folder. So this file here, and then it get this random text here, and then it will prepare some other variables like this JSON array, which have an items from Ollama. I don't think that this is actually used in this view. I think this is like a copy paste thing from Ollama.search. And then we have this autocomplete settings. So is it like true or false? So this will be preparing all the variables which we need to render this sidebar here. Then the next step is actually to read the HTML page. And then in this HTML page, there are some template strings which we need to replace with the corresponding values from here. So for example, the nonce will be replaced by the nonce. The script URI will be replaced with the values here from the script URI string, and so on. Yeah. So to understand this better, I will show you what's inside this HTML file. As you can see, it's like a normal HTML file. Start with an HTML tag, then header. And as you can see in the header, there are some links for style sheets, and this string here will be replaced with the URI for the reset and VS Code style sheets, and there's some extra styles here. Then we are rendering the buttons. So this is the autocomplete toggle button, and then the search button, this one here, and then we have this text here, then another two buttons, and then the text below here. Yeah? And finally, you can see here we have the nonce, for example, and JavaScript section here. Also, this is empty. Actually, this can be removed. And then there's this script tag also here, which is loading this file, the Ollama sidebar. And then here we are defining an autocomplete variable, and this variable here have this $sign autocomplete. So this value here will be replaced by the value from the settings. So as you can see here, we are replacing this string. So dollar, then between braces autocomplete with the variable, so true or false. And then we have some helper functions, to update the text here on side the autocomplete button. And we are calling this function here. So basically to write autocomplete is running or autocomplete is stopped and so on, yeah, based on the value which will be put here, so true or false. And then we're adding event listener, so on the click for this toggle autocomplete button. And as you can see here, when we click, we are calling the Ollama GSUtil.autocomplete. So this is implemented inside the Ollama sidebar.js here in the media. And also for the Ollama search, so when we click on the search, we are adding also event handler, which will call directly a function, again from the Ollama GSUtil. We will go through it next. And again, for the other two buttons, adding click handlers and calling the corresponding functions from Ollama GSUtil. So let's go to the Ollama javascript.js, which define this Ollama GSUtils. And as you can see here, each of these four functions, which correspond to these four buttons here, we simply calling a post message. So we are using the client-side APIs from VS Code. This is like using this function from VS Code, acquire VS Code API. So this object here contains a function called post message, and in this message we send a message to our server-side code. So as you can see here, now we are constructing the message. It's an object which contains a type and a value. So for example, here in the search, the type would be on search. In the autocomplete would be on autocomplete, for download on download, and for test on test. And then based on this type, we can decide on the server side what action to take. Yeah. There's also here these two functions for sending an info or an error message. So just remember that this will trigger the onDidReceive message function. And as you can see here, then that's why the switch on the type. And that's it for this sidebar. And let's go now to the Ollama search panel. So this is this file here, the search panel. It's very much similar to the sidebar. Differences is actually what function you use to create your HTML. So here we're creating web view panel, but it's very much also similar to before. We have to put the paths which we will use for the client side code, and then we are calling this create web view and then render the HTML. So rendering the HTML can be seen here in the constructor, where we are calling this update function, and in this underscore update function. So you can see now we are assigning the HTML similar to what we did in the side panel. So we get the HTML from this get HTML web view. We will go through it later. But then now here we have the onDidReceive message handler, which is similar to before. We get some data, and based on the type, we have like on info, on error, and on download. And then on test, I think this can be removed. I have to check that and clean this code for you. Yeah, but what's important now here is this on model, and this function will be called when you click on one of these buttons. And as you can see, this function will call Ollama utilities to set the model. And as we've seen, this function will actually pull the model and assign its name to the setting so that it can be used for generating the functions or for auto completion. Yeah. Now let's go to creating the HTML content, and it's also similar to before. So we need some URIs for the style sheets, then also one URI for the JavaScript, which is in the media, so the client side JavaScript, and then the nonce and the list of all available models. So this is from Ollama utils. So we've seen this function before. This will return a list of objects where each object contains a title, parameters, and a text and the description and so on about each model available in Ollama. And using this JSON stringify, we will be converting this to JSON, and later we will insert this to the client side. This is done similar to what we've seen in the sidebar. So basically first we read the HTML page, and for the search panel, this HTML page is called searchpanel.html. We will go through it later, and then we set the values of some variables as we did before also. Let's go to this HTML, and you will get to see all these variables inside this HTML file. So this is the search panel.html, and as you can see here directly, we have these two style sheets as before. Then here in the body, you can see we first have an input, which is this text box here. Then we have a div which will be used to show the results, so how many models are found. So this is this text here. Then we have a div which will be used to render the search results. So whenever you search, or if you did not search, then that will be rendering all the results. So all this will be rendered inside this. And then again, similar to before, you can see here we have some JavaScript sections. So this first one is defining all models. And if you remember, this string here will be replaced by this value here. So all the models which we got from Ollama. Then as you can see here, again, we are passing this JSON back. So we are getting these objects back here. And this object, we will use it to render this section here. So then in this section here, we are including this file here, search panel.js, which contain two functions. So one to search, so that where you have the items and an input event. So this function will be used when you click enter here, or when you are changing actually the input on this text view here. Whenever you get into the enter, so when you click enter, it will go through all these items here and see which one contain a text which is similar to the text which you wrote inside this search bar here, and return those items only. And then a function called build list, and this build will take these items and create some buttons and some text, as you can see here, and some horizontal separators based on the items which you pass to it. And as you can see here, it's appending them to the div, which will be actually this div here. Then we have this last JavaScript section here, which define the nonce for the helper JavaScript file, this search panel.js. And then we have this set model from main page, which will call the Ollama utility set model. And then as you can see here, we are getting the divs. So the div which will have the count, this div here, and then the div which will contain all the results here, and the search input edit box, this edit box here. So this line will use all models to render this page here. Then we are focusing the input. So we are giving the input to this search edit here, and we are adding an event listener for the key down for the edit. And as you can see, every time we change this edit box here, we will call the search function in the Ollama JS utils, and based on the returned value, we will render a new output here. So that's it basically for this Ollama search. So the final file which we'll look at is this completion provider. And in the completion provider, so as I said, I copied the code from the Microsoft examples, and then the only thing which I needed to change is how to do the completion. And that would be this part here. So this underscore do function, and you can see here this do function first waits a little bit. I'm assuming now if you are typing very fast, I don't want to send a request for every character which you are typing. So basically that's why this wait for 500 milliseconds. So it waits 500 milliseconds. If no input has came, it will send the request. And this auto completion request, you can see it's here. We are calling the Ollama utilities auto completion, which this function we already seen before. And we just need now to return the corresponding result. And VS Code will take care of telling you to press the tab. And if you press the tab, it will add the code to the editor. That's all done from the VS Code side. So that's it basically for this VS Code extension. I maybe missed some parts. If you are really interested and you went through the code and you did not understand something, then please write me in the comments, and I will hope that you will enjoy using this extension. And as I said, every time I see a new functionality which can be added to this extension, which could be helpful, for example, like generating icons or so, I will try to add it to this extension. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and see you in the next one. Bye.